Who stood out at minicamp? We're going to hear from Matt Derrick today, one of your Chiefs experts on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
And welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. You can go find me over at Chiefs Corner, talking a lot about getting into the 53-man roster and the salary cap. He is Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest. We will be talking to him in just a moment. Later in the show, we're going to talk about this Brazil trip week 1 and what the players and what the NFL is thinking about that. But we're going to also talk about roster questions headed to St. Joe. But we're going to start off talking about some minicamp standouts. Matt, they had minicamp last week. It's over. Now you're in the doldrums of the offseason, waiting for training camp to start. But what did you see at training? What did you see at minicamp that really stood out to you?
Yeah, there was a couple of things, but I think that the one thing in particular was on Tuesday, first time in a long time, at least for the media, we got to see a practice and even some fans, because there were some season ticket holders out there that got to be out there for the first peek or first look, whatever they want to call it, for in the mini camp with having fans out there. But you got to see Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy on the field at the same time, along with Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, running back of your choice, Isaiah Pacheco. Now it was really only in 7-on-7 because Hollywood wasn't really out there for some of the team drills, but that's a milestone. That's been a long time since we saw that, since it was just very briefly in training camp last year before, before Hollywood Brown's injury, that you really got to see this offense at what it feels like is its full potential. And I felt like when those guys were out there on the field and practicing, the energy level was a little higher, the excitement level. I think Patrick Mahomes, who I thought had a tremendous OTAs. I mean, he looked in midseason form all 3-4 weeks of the program that we got to see, looked great. But I thought it was even elevated during that 7-on-7 when they were all out there. Ball just looked a little bit crisper, and Hollywood Brown told us last week that he feels like that this could be he feels like it is the best group of pass catchers that he's played with in his career. And I have no reason to doubt him, because when those guys are all on the field, it does look like the best group of pass catchers that I think Patrick Mahomes has had since at least 2019, 2020 kind of era. So I was really impressed with that. And obviously this offense is really excited if they can keep those guys healthy.
Well, yeah, and you talk about, I remember seeing all those guys out there on training camp before Hollywood Brown got hurt, and the offense just looked crisper. It looked a little bit different than it did, obviously, in season when you have none of those guys really playing together. You have Worthy and Kelce most of the season being able to play, but the other two were basically out most of the season. So what else did you see? Who else stood out to you in those times that you got to see in minicamp?
Yeah, the one big one for me was, on Tuesday, was Trent McDuffie. And Trent McDuffie all throughout OTAs and the mini camp was fantastic. I mean, it's clear to me that he is one of the best corners in the league. And I'm not just saying like top 10, I think top 3, top 5 for sure. And Tuesday, I had to write down about 5 or 6 times just plays that he allowed to happen because it was a non-contact practice and there's no pads, because he was pulling up to make sure that he didn't destroy anybody, but he was in position to either make interceptions, break up passes, force fumbles. There was quite a few that he was absolutely in the right spot to make a play on the football. If, like I said, if it was a full go and contact allowed, he would have had probably a couple of footballs on the ground, a couple of passes broken up, maybe an interception too. But I thought he just had a tremendous camp. In front of us, he had a couple of interceptions. They were of the deflection variety. But again, I mean, that's Trent McDuffie. I mean, he's always had a nose for the football, always been in the right place, hasn't always translated a lot of interceptions, has translated into a lot of fumbles. But I think it's just a matter of time before he starts being a turnover machine. Maybe this is the year.
And that's the crazy thing about Trent McDuffie is watching him play. You would think that the way he positions himself, the way he's always in position, and the way that, the other part of it that plays into it is he isn't thrown at very much, so he doesn't get in a lot of opportunities to get in INTs. But to get his first pick in year 3 for a guy that is usually almost always in the right place at the right time and usually getting at least a hand on the ball. And like you said, creating turnovers with, fumbles, it's kind of surprising. I do think that he is the ball's going to bounce his way a little bit more, and he could get a lot more interceptions going forward.
It could, and let's face it. I mean, there's the one difference with Trent McDuffie that makes it harder for him to get interceptions than probably some other corners, and is that almost every receiver he's going up against is bigger than him. I mean, it has longer arms, more height, But hey, McDuffie is always in a position to be able to make a play on the ball, and the fact that maybe he just doesn't have that extra inch or two of arm length to be able to turn a deflection into an interception doesn't bother me. I mean, as long as one is either breaking up the ball or he's forcing the quarterback to look to a different receiver, because let's face it, Trent McDuffie isn't on your number 5 receiver very often. He's usually on the number 1 guy. So the turnovers don't bother me.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if he's even available when Kansas City's picking in the 20s, if his arm length is an inch or two longer, which was one of the reasons why I wasn't expecting Kansas City to be interested in him the year they drafted him, because he didn't fit their prototypical style and size. So it's interesting that they ended up going that direction. What did you see from like a Josh Simmons, who a lot of people didn't even think was going to be maybe even practicing at all during this time in OTAs and minicamp?
Yeah, there's no one that's not surprised by the progress of Josh Simmons and where he's at right now. I think even Josh Simmons might be a little surprised in where he's at right now. Taking him at face value, he didn't really know for sure what the Chiefs were going to allow him to do during this period. I'm not even sure, like I said, that he was completely comfortable with how far he'd be able to go and how fast. And the Chiefs right now, where he ended training camp is where the Chiefs were hoping that he might be 2 weeks into training camp. So he is significantly ahead of schedule. So, he's ready for the next step, which is going to be to put the pads on and to see what he can do when there's more physicality, and to see what kind of strength, what kind of power, what kind of drive he has in that base with that knee. We're going to find more about, it's not just the quickness which he's had, and that's been great, but it's going to be how good is he on those reach blocks? How is he on drives? How is he in run blocking? That's going to be the test, and we'll find out for sure. But so far, Josh Simmons has passed every test the Chiefs have given it. Now the last test is to get more physical.
And really quick, before we go to the next segment, I have to ask this question, because to me, Ryan and I have talked about this a couple of different times. With the way Josh Simmons is looking, with the fact that he is seemingly recovering so quickly with his injury, it's possible that he and Jaylen Moore are going at it for a competition to see who the starting left tackle is. How do you think the Chiefs are going to feel if Josh Simmons is able to beat out Jaylen Moore, considering they just paid Jaylen Moore $30 million over 2 years?
I think they're going to be okay with it. I'm not sure how I would be with it, but
Right.
Also look at the long term. I mean, once again, I mentioned this before, that hey, the best case scenario for the Chiefs, to a degree, was that Jaylen Moore's your left tackle this season. Juwan Taylor's your right tackle this season. They stay healthy. They play well enough that Josh Simmons isn't required to play, and you win a Super Bowl. That's great. That's a great scenario. And what happens next season? Next season, Josh Simmons is your left tackle. Jaylen Moore's your right tackle, because Juwan Taylor is going to be gone. I mean, that's what you're still, if you're hoping for the Chiefs, you sign Jaylen Moore for 2 seasons for a reason. One was to be competition and insurance for whatever option. And let's face it, when they signed Jaylen Moore, it was the idea that he could be their left tackle this year if needed.
And no idea that they could get Simmons.
Right. But it was also with the idea that, hey, they've got a transition for 2026, that they've got a right tackle, that if they're able to get a left tackle in the draft, they got a right tackle for 2026.
Yeah, it's a great problem to have for Kansas City. When we get back, we're going to talk about some roster questions headed into St. Joe when the Chiefs head to training camp. Guys, you probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, but maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. It's completely online. Rugiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please review Rugiet website for full safety information. Training camp is less than a month away, and is it just me, or does that seem a little bit earlier than the Chiefs have done in the past? Even though they're not doing the normal 3-day rookies and injured players coming in early.
Yeah, well, you got the 47 days that everybody shows up for training camp, and that gets altered with a little bit. Like the Chargers, they're showing up July 12th for their training camp since they're playing in the Pro Football Hall of Fame game. Just hope that you never win that lottery of playing
Right.
the Pro Football Hall of Fame game, because that
especially considering how late their seasons usually go for the Chiefs.
Yeah, and and it wouldn't change, when the veterans start, but not having that rookie mini camp does take off 3 days essentially for the entire organization. It's 3 more days that the quarterbacks, training staff, coaches, everybody doesn't have to be in St. Joe. And I think that's kind of a big deal for Andy Reid, because not only did he talk about the fact that the numbers aren't there, they can't always do 11 on 11 for the rookie minicamp, and this year even harder because they don't have very many injured players. I don't think that there's any injured players that maybe qualify to come in early, other than maybe like a guy that was already going to be there, maybe like a Trey Watson backup tight end. There just aren't very many numbers since everybody worked during OTAs. So I get why Andy Reid didn't see like there was maybe much reason to do the rookie mini camp, and I know the players appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. They appreciate that extra little bit of time off that they get, especially a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who's not going to have to be there and normally would have been in other scenarios. You talk about, we look at all the different players that are going to their first Chiefs camp, and Josh Simmons is one of them. We kind of talked about the last segment. And that's one of the battles headed into training camp is the left tackle position. You have Jalen Moore and you have Josh Simmons that are going to be going at that. But another one of them is right next to it when you have Kingsley Suamataia and Mike Caliendo. Is there anybody else that maybe is looking at that left guard position to be a starter there?
The only other name I think you'd probably throw in there would be Hunter Norzad, and I think that the Chiefs right now are pretty comfortable with Norzad just simply being their number 2 center, and then a backup at both left guard and right guard, being a swing backup for this season. Obviously, the loser at the left guard position between Kingsley and Caliendo will be a backup as well, and potentially all 3 of those spots. But I think that there's with Norzad in particular, he's the one that they feel the most comfortable with at center. Caliendo's an emergency center, but I don't think he's one necessarily they would feel the most comfortable with. And that's maybe a little bit of the reason why Norzad right now is not in the conversation at guard, because they would feel more comfortable with him being kind of the 6th guy off the bench. We'll see what happens. I'm assuming right now and certainly the way that it looks is that left guard spot is Kingsley's to lose, and so I think he's going to be the starting left guard in week 1 unless there's an injury or he gives the job away.
And I know that there's some Chiefs fans that are frustrated because they thought that maybe he could be their left tackle of the future. Obviously, now you have Josh Simmons, so you hope he's going to be that guy. I'm not going to be upset if they ended up using a 2nd-round pick on a guy that can go and play and be an above-average guard. The thing I don't like for Kingsley, though, is he's stepping into somebody's shoes that are so huge to be able to fill. That's not a good scenario for him. But I do like his ability, and I think that he'll be fine there. When you flip it over to the other side of the ball, you start looking at the defense, and corner is going to be a position that there are so many players. I did a show yesterday talking about the 53-man roster, and you start talking about the corner position, there are so many players that you are just wondering who is going to make it, because I can't see any way that they keep more than 6 corners. And that doesn't include Shamari Connor, who I think is probably going to be labeled a corner, but is probably going to play a lot of safety too.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I feel like, and from what I could see during OTAs, I feel like Roland Wallace is even being kind of put into that role of, is he a corner or is he a safety? He's the cornerback version, basically, of Chamari Connor. Chamari Connor's a safety who plays a little corner. I wouldn't be surprised if Roland Wallace found himself being a corner who plays just a little bit of safety.
The more you can do.
Exactly, and not necessarily a free safety or anything on the back end, but at least somebody they feel like that. Hey, can maybe cover a tight end, drop back a little bit, and doesn't have to, can play inside obviously as a nickel like Connor has done. That he can be kind of a complementary player in that regard. And then when they change, if they need to make changes, they feel like Roland Wallace is somebody who can adapt and like I said, go from a nickel corner to a safety, in the middle of a play call. So. That's why, that's kind of the cutoff to me. I mean, you look at that cornerback spot, and obviously Trent McDuffie is your number one guy. Who's going to be the number two starter? I mean, Jaylen Watson and Christian Fulton are both kind of different players. Now, obviously, the Chiefs are playing a lot more money than Christian Fulton. I wouldn't be surprised if those two players, whether it starts the season or at some point in the season, maybe it's a job share, where one's playing more when they're a better matchup that week against maybe the number two, number three receiver on another team. That I could see going back and forth. Right now, certainly it's those two competing for that number two spot. And then you got that next tier down, with Nazeeh Johnson, Josh Williams, and Roland Wallace. There's going to be some other young guys trying to get their way in there. But it's really easy, Chris, right now to put together 6 names and feel like that's your cornerback group for 2025.
Well, and you didn't even talk about Noah Williams, who was a draft pick that they had this year. And you talk about Roland Wallace. And Ryan and I talked about this when we were talking about the corners a couple weeks ago. One of the things I like about having him on the roster along with Chamari Connor is, you talk about putting 6 or 7, you talk about putting 6 DBs out there. If you put both Roland Wallace and Chamari Connor out there with Hicks and Cook and, whatever corners you want, those guys can mix and match, and you don't necessarily know who's going to be playing the corner role or who's going to be playing the safety role. I like that thought process and their ability to do different things. So that I really like. But you look at Noah Williams, who's going to be on this roster, obviously with his draft pick status. But then you look at about Joshua Williams. You look at Nazeeh Johnson. One of those guys has a chance of maybe not making this roster just because of all the other players. And you talk about Christian Fulton and Jaylen Watson, and it's possible that maybe they are sharing. But the problem that Watson is running into in his career so far is he keeps getting injured. And it may not be something that actually keeps him out of games. But I also think that maybe the signing to Christian Fulton gives them the ability to have somebody in there that they think can play if something does happen to Watson and it's not an injury that they think he can really play through, because I think he's played through a couple of injuries that he probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, and when we're talking about there being really 7 corners for likely 6 spots and not getting into maybe some other guys that might end up having good camps, it always seems to happen. There's some undrafted free agent that pops up that makes a case, and and there might even be somebody else that pops up and makes a case. But hard to make argument that you're going to be able to keep 7 corners, but let's face it, what are the chances that 7 corners are going to make it to week 1 healthy? Doesn't happen very often. So, that's why you got to feel at least decent that this team is ready for any injuries at that spot when it happens. I mean, if all 7 of those guys are healthy at the end of August and you've got that kind of decision about who you're going to leave off and maybe lose on waivers, I mean, Chiefs would hate to lose any one of them. But, it seems like, hey, the odds are that it's going to be difficult to get 7 guys there all in one piece to training camp.
Yeah, I agree. And the other position I want to talk about really quick before we go and talk about Brazil, because I think there's a lot to talk about in that Brazil trip. Defensive tackle. Chris Jones is going to be a starter, obviously. But then it's kind of up in the air. You have a rookie that you brought in Norman Lott. You have Mike Pennell. You have Jerry Tillery. But it's still questionable whether or not, and this is the position I thought that yesterday, if there's a position that Kansas City could be looking for, this is the position I would think that they would be looking for as defensive tackle. But what did you see, and kind of where do you think that heads?
Yeah, I mean, right now, looking at this roster, at least the way that the Chiefs, manage things during the minicamp in particular, which is usually a pretty good indication about what they're thinking going into camp, Omar Norman Lott would be your starter next to Chris Jones. It's now the question is, hey, and you've heard a lot of comparisons between him and Tershawn Wharton. Tershawn Wharton played like 670 snaps last year. Is Omar Norman-Lott ready to pick up that kind of workload? I mean, the Chiefs are usually have been really, careful with managing rookie snaps, especially in this era where they plan on going to February every single year. And, are they going to be able to do that with Omar Norman-Lott, or are they just going to have to play him from the very beginning? Now, I could also see a scenario where maybe he starts, but still most of his time on the field is on third down and obvious passing downs. And then you're going to see a lot more of Tillery and Mike Pennell and other situations. That makes total sense. I still think the Chiefs could use a defensive tackle. I'm not sure there's one out there that makes a ton of sense for them. And then the Chiefs will come back with, hey, the great thing is that they feel like that they got a couple of guys, especially like a Mike Dana, that can kick inside and obviously be that extra defensive tackle when you need it on passing downs.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking, is that's the other side of that, is that they have those defensive ends that can break down inside and help them if they absolutely need to and give you a couple more snaps. When we get back, we're going to talk about the Brazil trip for week 1 and what it means for this Chiefs team. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I've used Monarch Money for at least 7 or 8 months now, I think, and I've loved it. It is awesome to be able to have everything at your fingertips. You see, and it budgets out your money. It shows you what you're spending your money on. It shows you your income in, your income out. It is a fantastic app. You need to go give Monarch Money a try. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Kansas City gets to head to Brazil in a game that it sounds like could be not very looked forward to by the organization and by the NFL in general. Last year, it did not turn out very well for the Packers. They lost Jordan Love for a couple of games because of the field. I think some people would say that. What do you know about this game in Brazil and the Chiefs headed there?
Yeah, you forget a lot of the things that were going on in that week 1 game in São Paulo last year. You had what looked like basically playing on an ice rink because the field was so slippery. Now I expect that, both teams this year are going to be a little bit more prepared for maybe the humidity that it sounds like made that field a little bit wetter and slicker than anybody was expecting. So you figure that, hey, they'll bring different spikes and be ready for be able to turn on a dime. NFL's also been more involved this year with the field, so they're hoping that it's going to be a different condition and improve from last year. But hey, it's fall, well, it's spring, I guess, technically, and they're coming out of winter at that point in Brazil. So completely different season. I mean, it's a totally different environment than what the teams are going through during this time of year in North America. I mean, you're going to a completely different hemisphere. So you got to deal with that. And then you completely forget too, remember Twitter was banned in Brazil at that time last year. So reporters couldn't tweet about the game for what was going on there. Now it might be better this year, but it still sounds like there's going to be a lot of questions just about, hey, how are people going to get around the security that goes on around this? Doesn't sound like the teams are going to get a lot of opportunities to move around. But here's the one thing that I don't know got a lot of buzz last year, Chris, but if you go and search for it and look for any of the stories talking about Green Bay and their bus rides, the Green Bay Packers were not happy with the road team accommodations. Remember, the Chiefs are the road team in this game too. This is a Chargers home game. The Chargers are going to be staying in a hotel that is about 20 minutes from the stadium. The visiting team stays in a hotel that is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic, in the bus ride. So as the Packers described it last year, they said it's like high school football, that it's, you're getting on a bus for 2 hours to go to your game. It's just, they took them right back to Friday nights in high school. So
it is Friday night. So
exactly. So I haven't talked to anybody with the Chiefs right now that's looking forward to the trip, but especially because, they've also been told by the NFL that No, you really don't want to be wandering off campus. You don't be wandering from the hotel or from inside the NFL security bubble. So I don't know how much of a Brazil experience that they're going to get. The best Brazil experience they may get will probably be spending a lot of time on the buses, because I believe that they have the same. I believe they're going to be working at the stadium. I think that's going to be their practice area, because even the Packers were complaining about the bus rides last year for practices too. So,
Jeez.
yeah, not ideal if you're the visiting team in this game.
And that's a bad situation to be in. And one of the things you look at the bus ride there, that's going to be a problem. Just the accommodations and being in an area that you don't understand, you don't really know. But the one thing that I think is going to actually kind of work in Kansas City's favor to an extent is they are going away for this game week 1. They get an extra couple of days to come back when they travel back. That's going to be good, because if it was one of those situations where you're playing even on a Saturday, I mean, the travel, I was looking at flights to Brazil. It's 15 hours, something like that from Kansas City.
And it sounds like the charter flight's about 12 hours. So and the Chiefs will be flying down. I believe they're going to be flying down after practice or after the kind of meetings on Tuesday. So they're going to end up doing most of their work down. Well, they'll have one practice on Tuesday in Kansas City, and then they're going to fly down there. Sounds like maybe overnight Tuesday into Wednesday morning, workout Wednesday morning. I think there's a 3-hour time difference there too. So that also impacts the travel time and when your body and everything is getting there. I haven't heard when the Chargers are going down, but the Chiefs will be going down about 3 days in advance of the game, which obviously is different than usual. And then there's little things like, for a lot of players, their routine, some are early arrivals and some are late arrivals. And so when you're on a road game, there's an early bus and a late bus. Brazil, there's one bus. It's multiple buses, but there's just one departure time. So if you're one of those players who likes to get there late or either early, well, one, it doesn't matter because you got to leave 2 hours earlier than you would have anyway. But if you're a late arrival, no option. You're going to have to be there early with everybody else.
Well, and the crazy thing is you don't even think about all the logistics of what's going to be going on, because you just think about all the different things that aren't going to be normal for the Chiefs in a completely different country, a completely different hemisphere. You talk about the spring just being an issue. The food, the water, all of that is going to be way different than what you're used to in America. And I understand they've played internationally before, but I think Brazil is a whole different ball game. It reminds me a little bit about them playing the Chargers, I believe it was Mexico City a couple of years ago. Obviously, the travel length is a lot different, so that's going to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad it's a Friday night game versus a Saturday or Sunday game. But it's still just a completely different scenario.
Yeah, and the Chiefs, obviously, they've got experience with traveling for games like this. I mean, you mentioned Mexico. Obviously, it was only 2 years ago since Germany. A lot of players still on this team. Andy Reid has made a lot of trips overseas and obviously has generally had a pretty good record. I mean, the only one that you would have that would you say, I guess, was a loss is the Astros game that would have been in Mexico City with the Rams. It was actually in Los Angeles. So but yeah, there are going to be some challenges for this game for the Chiefs. There's going to be some advantages too, like you mentioned, and the fact that the Chargers are basically beginning training camp 10 days earlier than the Chiefs. That's a long training camp for the Chargers. Yeah. And again, you've got the challenge of returning from camp, and then all of a sudden you're getting everything to go on a 12-hour plane ride to Brazil. I don't envy anybody starting off the season that way. At least, like you said, they've got a couple of days to recover afterwards. But week 2 is not going to be any picnic either.
No, and then you sit there and you look at the fact that you talk about the Chargers having that extra game. How's that going to play into when they're going to be playing their players, how they're going to be playing their players? Because they have a different scenario. They have 4 games in the preseason. The Chiefs only have 3. How do you play your starters in that first preseason game? Do you play them later? And then if you don't play them in weeks 3 and 4, then you've had this huge layoff before you play the Chiefs week 1. That's not going to be a good scenario for them either.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to require a little bit interesting management. I mean, and the Chiefs have a little bit of the same problem too. I think some of it's just going to be that the Chargers, is it going to be good if their starters get more work or less work? I mean, you still always have that challenge now, especially with the way the preseason schedule is set up. That final preseason game is so far ahead of the season you've got a long break, so yeah, you do have to make that decision about, are your starters going to play at all in game 3? Obviously there's a lot of teams, their starters aren't even playing in the preseason at all. So you're going to make that decision as well.
Yeah, and Andy Reid has never done that, and I've really appreciated that actually with him playing all of his players at least in a game or two, so they get that time out there, they get the ability to go out and play, and at least get a real hit, because training camp gives you those real hits to an extent, but nothing like an actual in-game situation. So I do like that as well.
Yeah, I don't think that it helps, that without a doubt, I think it helps the Chiefs. I mean, Andy Reid, obviously, with maybe a couple of minor exceptions, has had really good success in this era in September, first quarter of the season. And I feel like a big part of it is that he's got his teams ready to play beginning of the season. And you don't normally see the rustiness with the Chiefs that other teams have in the first couple of weeks of the season.
Well, and then when you start looking at how they've played in September, and then how it translates into October and November, they're so far ahead of other teams by the time they get to October. Some other teams are trying to chase and are pressing. Look at the Cincinnati Bengals from a couple of years ago. You lose the 2 of the first 3, or you go 1 and 3 in the first part, and then you're chasing the rest of the season, and it's a press going every other game after that. So I think that it's fantastic Kansas City's been able to do what they've been doing. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it. That's going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.